city's fresh choice. More music, more money. Power 96 FM has cornered the market on instant gratification. We didn't invent foreplay. We just perfected it.
Oh, that sounds good to me.
What's that?
Well, in the early 80s, top 40 radio was starting to decline. Stations like WABC in New York, WLS in Chicago was one of the last to go down, KFRC in San Francisco, KHJ in Los Angeles, CKLW, Windsor, Ontario / Detroit. These were all big radio stations that had a national presence all across the country that were all failing because AM radio was failing.
There were only 5 major AM stations back when AM was big, and there might be 20 FM major signals when FM was big, that radio stations could be more narrowly focused in their format.
There was so much great music coming out in the 80s, and it was just one after another, that there was so much enthusiasm for that music that the listeners couldn't get enough of it.
Country 106, 412, and let's go back to the phones.
Good afternoon, Country 106.
Yeah, is this Doug?
Yeah, this is Doug. How you doing today?
Okay. I'd like to make Paper Roses.
Paper Rosie.
Yeah, I haven't heard that in so long.
No problem. We can do that for you. Who's this calling?
This is Tony out in Trenton.
It was diverse. It really was. I mean, you still had Jackson Browne. You know, now he's doing Running on Empty. But you also had Motley Crue.
In the 80s, things started to change with AOR. They started calling it album-orientated rock.
You hear me roll Nobody But Me by George Thorogood. You want to be caller number 20 at 298-6360, and you'll pick up a pair of tickets.
It's hard to talk about radio in the 80s without thinking about MTV, which signed on in the early 80s and really changed the game.
It affected us in a way that we had to watch and realize what was happening with video. That video looked like it was going to have a very big part in this music puzzle that we had already put together.
We've got our 5th caller on the line right now. What's your name, guy?
Joel, how you doing?
Joe, how you doing? The Money Man here. Coming down the show tonight. I guess you are. Since you want, the phone's been ringing off the hook here. I guess everybody wants to get in for nothing, which is not a bad idea, you know?
Promotions departments were big for radio stations, especially in the 80s, because stations then were beginning to go out doing a little bit more events, you know, like at fairs or at concerts or different things like that. And everybody wants their swag.
The contests were really good, and listeners, I know it's really mind-boggling when you think how it's so different now, but how the participation was so great.
You recorded your first song in a bathroom?
Right, the very first single I ever did was a parody of My Sharona by the Nat called My Bologna.
Right.
And I was a teenager. I was going to college and I couldn't afford a real recording studio, so I recorded that in the bathroom.
Oh, the gluttony of it all, you know? It was just so, everything was easy. Promotions. There was money for promotions. There was money for, as you said, for salaries. There was money for giveaways. You know, those were the days of, you know, lots of budget. And excess in the business. And it wasn't a bad thing because it was, I agree with you. I think that the 90s were a pretty good time to be in radio.
You had so much to choose from. It's like, it almost got to be where, you know, what kind of mood am I in today?
The opinions expressed on the Rush Limbaugh program do not necessarily reflect those of WABC Radio or its management. And now, here's Rush Limbaugh.
Rush saved AM radio, but that was talk. Sports made it thrive. And Rush was doing great, and the talk stations were doing well, but sports is what really made it mainstream and gave AM radio 2 or 3 footholds in every market.
There's such a passion for your sports teams that if somebody's talking about them, you stop and listen. I think in every city, you embrace the teams. And then you want to hear more about them. You don't get enough.
Detroit's sports leader, Sports Radio 1130, The Fan.
Welcome to the Sunday Afternoon Sit. Usually we have music, but it's been deleted, so screw it. We'll just start just like this.
And I think that that's why sports radio caught on, is because you could talk about games, there were controversial plays, you could talk about it, you think your team was screwed. I mean, it became a 24/7 medium where you could always hear about it, and if you wanted to, you could call in and talk about it.
The 90s, when automation kicked in, the late 90s and voice tracking started, I think that human connection that I was speaking of before started to become a little bit diluted because you've got this jock that's doing middays and he's never set foot in a studio in Detroit. He's out of California recording a show for Detroit, so he doesn't know to call it the Palace and not the Palace of Auburn Hills. So there's this disconnect